shake and crumble at your name. The oceans roar and tumble at your name. Angels will bow, the earth will rejoice, your people cry out. Sing it out. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord. That's your name. The morning breaks in glory. That's your name. Creation sings your story. At your name, the angels will bow, the earth will rejoice, your people cry out. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord. Sing, there is no one like our God. We will praise you, there's no one like our God. We will sing, sing out, there is no one like our God. Praise, there's no one like our God. There is no one like our God. We will praise you, there's no one like our God. We will sing, there is no one like our God. We will praise you, there's no one like our God. We will sing. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord. Give him a shout of praise this morning, amen.
Who am I that the highest king would welcome? I was blind, but he brought me his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me.
say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am.
Sing that again.
I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am.
Declare it.
I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Yes, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. Sing it out. I'm a
Amen.
As we continue worship this morning, we're going to sing a new song. And I would invite you to use this opportunity to just draw closer to God because He's already here. Let's just use this moment to make room for Him to work through us and in our lives. So just bring everything you have, lay down at His feet, and just listen to Him speak to you. Thank you, Jesus.
Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you, God, to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Take it all, God.
Let's just sing. Here's where I lay it down. Lift your voice.
Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room
thank you for meeting us just there where we are. We make room for you, God, to work in us and through us. We give you all the glory and praise. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good to see all of you. Excited to be with you. As always, excited to be able to share with you, to share with those of you who are joining us online and upstairs in our venue as well. And as Brad said, just want to extend a happy Father's Day to all of you dads who are in the room or again tuning in with us. I hope you know and never forget what an incredibly important job it is that you have as a dad. And I hope you know, as your church family, we are here for you and with you. We want to see you win at that and succeed at that and just be the man God made you to be. And also, if you're a dad in the room or again watching, we hope you find a place here in our church where you can grow and become the dad that God has created and called you to be as well. So happy Father's Day. We're glad you joined us. And if you're here, if you have a Bible with you, I want to invite you to turn in it with me to the book of Luke, chapter 18. We're going to be continuing this series together, as Brad just said, a series we've just called Bless. And all along throughout the series so far, we pointed out to you that we believe that we have a God who is on a mission in the world. And he's on a mission to rescue and restore this broken world that we've all inherited and lived in and contributed to in our own ways. And one of the things that we've pointed out to you is that we believe if we consider ourselves to be a part of God's family, if we consider ourselves to be a follower of Jesus, then we also believe that we all have a part to play in that. And as it relates to our part and what God is inviting us into with him to be a part of with him in the work that he's doing in the world, we believe that God's strategy for rescuing and restoring the world has always been a blessing strategy. Going all the way back to the time of Abraham, thousands and thousands of years ago, down to the time of Jesus and his first disciples and followers, 2,000 years ago, all the way down to you and me here today. We said it's a lot like breathing, that in God's design for us and his intention for us, it's kind of like breathing, that we breathe in from God the things that he wants to bless us with, his goodness, his grace, his provision, his love, his rescuing, restoring work in us. We breathe that in from him, but not just to keep that to ourselves. We also have to be able to kind of breathe that out to others around us. We've been blessed, as Dan said in the first week, to be a blessing. It requires both. Just like we see physically, if you never breathe in, you can't breathe out. But if you only breathe in, you won't be breathing very long. It requires for us to do both. And so that's why we're talking about this in this series, why we're walking through what we're doing here in June. That's why we're going to be doing what we talked about, as Brad just mentioned a moment ago, in the month of July with the Moving In series. We want to get better at this together as a church this summer. And we want to find our place as we go out into the world. We want to be able to bless people there as we gather together here. We want to invite, as we said in July, we want to invite people to come and be a part of what God is doing here in our church as well. And so we're so excited about what God's going to do, not only in us, but through us as we walk through this together. And as Brad mentioned a moment ago also, we said that to kind of walk through this Bless series and to get better at doing this, to bless others in the ways that God has blessed us, we've used the word bless itself as an acronym to remind us and challenge us with 5 simple missional practices that we believe we see in the life of Jesus and that he invites us to live out in our lives as well. And just to remind you what those are, you see them up here on the screen. The letter B reminds us and challenges us to begin with prayer. And then L challenges us to listen to others. E challenges us to eat together with others. The first S is a reminder to serve others, to come alongside of the needs that we discover they have. And then the second S is a reminder, a challenge to share God's story with others and to share our story and how God's story has changed our story and how it can change other people's story as well. And so this is what we mean by bless. Last week, Pastor Brian talked about this first letter B, beginning with prayer, that we have to start there because really what we're doing, we believe God is already up to something. He's already at work in the world, and we're just trying to join him in a conversation that his Spirit is already having with people around us, the people we live with and learn with and work with and play with. So we begin with prayer just to say, God, we want to join you in the work we believe you're already doing. And here's one of the things I found in my life, and I think is going to be true in your life as well. As we begin with prayer, as we pray for people in our lives around us, particularly the people that feel far from God, that need to experience God's blessing work in their life, just as we've experienced it in our lives, as we begin there and as we start to pray for people around us, one of the ways that God kind of responds to that at times, that I think he invites us then to kind of step in a little bit further and to do these next few things that we're going to be talking about today and in the upcoming weeks as well. And we begin to have opportunities then to listen to people and to love them through our listening and to bless them through our listening. We even have opportunities, and I think Jesus invites us then to eat together with people. And this is what I want to talk about with you today, these next two kind of steps in this sequence of listening and eating, which is fantastic that we get to talk about the ministry and mission of eating together, right? On Father's Day weekend, some of you dads are here, some of you guys are here. How cool is it that one of the most missional, impactful things that I think we can do sometimes in life is just to eat with people. And so I'm excited to talk about that with you, partly because I love to eat. And I always joke with people, I have the appetite of a 6'6" man, but the love handles of a 5'6" man, right? I just need God to stretch me out a little bit so I can eat like I want to eat. But excited to talk about these two things with you today. And where I want to begin with that this morning with you is this. I want to share with you a big idea that if you were handed some teaching notes when you came in today, I encourage you to take those out. You can follow along there as we walk through this. But the big idea is going to kind of introduce where we're going and guide our conversation together today. And so let me just kind of lead out by sharing with you this big idea that we're going to be talking about together, which is this. So when it comes to listening and eating and why they're so significant and why Jesus practiced them and why I think he invites us to practice these things with the people in our lives around us as well, is that when we listen and eat, we let others be heard and belong. And I think this is so powerful and so profound, as we'll hopefully come to understand or be reminded of as we walk through this together today. And what I want to do to kind of introduce this idea or illustrate this idea or let it come to life for you for a moment, I just want to begin by sharing with you a couple of stories from the life and example of Jesus, ways that we actually see this flesh out and come to life right before our eyes as Jesus listened to people and as Jesus ate with people. And in doing so, when he listened to them and he ate with them, he let them be heard and he let them belong. So let me share with you first a story that we find in Luke chapter 18. I asked you to turn there here just a moment ago. And in this story, it's an example of Jesus listening to someone so that they can be heard. And I want to read this story for you. Before we do, let me give you a little bit of context of what we see in this story and what Jesus was dealing with and what he was experiencing as he walked into this moment that we're going to read about here in just a moment. This story is a story of Jesus one day traveling from northern Israel, where he spent most of his time when he was here on earth, to the city of Jerusalem, which is obviously a significant city in Jesus' day. And it was on his way to Jerusalem. He had to pass through a town called Jericho. And he was traveling with his disciples, his earliest followers there who were with him. And I don't know about you, but whenever I think about Jesus kind of traveling with his disciples and walking along the road, obviously they didn't have cars back then 2,000 years ago. Whenever I imagine what it must have looked like for Jesus to travel somewhere with his disciples, many times in my mind, I kind of imagine a picture somewhat like this, right? Some guys kind of casually moseying along, everybody listening with an attentive ear to what Jesus is saying, is teaching and talking along the way. And it's just kind of like this easy stroll to wherever it is that they're going. And while maybe culturally and when it comes to their clothing and their beards and all that other kind of stuff, maybe it looked something like that. What I want to point out for you as we set up the story this morning is this, that while it may have looked something like that, I think for Jesus and his followers that day as they were walking to Jerusalem, I think it actually felt something more like this. And I don't know if any of you ever driven to Florida at spring break time. Some of you made that trip. This is a picture of that, right? It's an example of a time when everybody from one place is going to the same place at the same time, many times on the same roads, right? And you know what comes with that. It's not easy. It's not an easy stroll to wherever you're going. It's stressful. It's cramped. It's congested. It's chaotic. It's noisy. It's distracting. Depending on your persuasion, it's a little frustrating. You have all the different parts and pieces that go with great road trips like that. A little bit of road rage and kids that can't get along and husbands and wives that are bickering with each other and saying, you forgot that? I thought you were going to bring that with us, and all that kind of stuff that happens like that. I think for Jesus in this story, rather than an easy walk with very little distraction or very little things that could cause frustration or congestion for them. I think it was a lot more like this, because Jesus was heading to Jerusalem for one of the most important festivals and feasts that happened in the calendar for the Jewish people. It was the Jewish Passover. And so everybody from all over Israel and many people from all over the world were making their way to Jerusalem. At the same time, many of them on the same roads. And it would have been extremely chaotic and busy and noisy and cramped and congested. I want you to think about that in a moment as we read this story and what Jesus did and what I think is so compelling about what he did in light of that. Now, in addition to that, there was something else that Jesus was facing, something else that he was dealing with, in addition to all of those dynamics of just a crazy, congested road trip that he and his disciples were on their way to Jerusalem. Jesus, in addition to all of that, was bearing the weight of knowing what was coming. He knew that his days were numbered. You see, for Jesus, he had been to Jerusalem many times before, but he knew, maybe not everybody else knew it, but Jesus knew that this was going to be his last trip to Jerusalem. Because before he would leave town on this trip, Jesus knew he was going to end up on a cross, dying for the sins of the world. I don't know about you, but if you put yourself in Jesus' sandals for a moment, can you imagine the weight, the burden that if you were Jesus, you'd be feeling, as not only you're in all of the chaos and congestion, but you know that your days are numbered. You know what's coming and what lies ahead. I want to give all of that to you as backdrop for what we see Jesus do here in this story I want to read for you. Because I think it helps it stand out just how powerful and profound it is that what Jesus actually did. So let me read this for you in Luke chapter 18. Again, you can read along in your Bible if you have one. You can listen along as I read this for you. I want to start in verse 35, and here's what it says about Jesus that day. It says, as Jesus approached Jericho, again, he's on his way to Jerusalem. He has got to pass through Jericho, and as he approaches Jericho, there was a blind man who was sitting by the roadside begging. When the blind man heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening, and they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. So this blind man did what any desperate man, desperate for hope and help and healing in some way would do. It says, he called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now those who led the way heard the man, and they rebuked him. They said, leave him alone. Be quiet. They tried to silence him up and to be quiet. But this man shouted all the more. And he cried out again. He said, Son of David, have mercy on me. And this is where it gets interesting. This is where I want you to notice what Jesus did. Again, remember, this wasn't an easy stroll through the park. It wasn't a casual walk with his disciples. It was crazy. It was chaotic. It was congested. It was noisy. It was distracting. It was frustrating. Everybody's trying to get the same place at the same time. And in addition to all of that, Jesus knew what was coming. He knew that his days were numbered. He knew that the cross was before him. I don't know about the rest of you, but I know how irritated and agitated and antisocial I get when I just have like a project due at work that's coming up, right? And yet here's Jesus going to the cross. And in the midst of all of that, the noise, the distractions, the chaos, knowing what lied ahead of him, I want you to notice here, Jesus stopped. And he ordered that this man that everybody else had neglected and overlooked and ignored, and some of them were actually trying to kind of shut up and silence completely, this man that nobody else was paying attention to, Jesus, the one with plenty on his mind and plenty of distractions around him, he stopped. He had the man brought to him. And when the man came near, Jesus asked him a question. He said, what do you want me to do for you? Now, given the fact that this man was blind, I have a suspicion that Jesus and everybody else in the crowd that day knew already what this man wanted Jesus to do for him, and knew already what this man needed Jesus to do. He wanted to be able to see, right? And Jesus asking that question, it raises another question for me. Why did Jesus ask the question? I think the answer to that is this. Jesus asked the question. He listened to this man so that this man could be what? Heard. So the man responds and says, Lord, nobody's ever listened to me before. He says, I want to see. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praised God, and when all the people saw it, they praised God as well. Such an incredible story, such a great reflection of who Jesus was and how he did things and what he was about. And And while we could point out a lot of things from the story, the thing I hope we don't miss this morning that I want to reiterate for you here is just the way that Jesus listened. Again, in all the noise, all the chaos, all the congestion, all that would have been on his heart, all the things that he knew lied ahead of him, all the reasons why Jesus could have just walked on by him. Yet nevertheless, Jesus stopped and he chose to listen so that this man could be heard. This is just one example of something we see Jesus doing over and over and over again, all throughout his life and his ministry. And one of the reasons I think Jesus did this, that he would stop and he would listen, he would let others be heard, is exactly what we're talking about together today. I think Jesus knew that one of the ways that we could love people around us, one of the ways that we could be a blessing to people around us, just as God has blessed us, is simply by listening to them. Because when we listen to them, we let them be heard. There's something powerful in that. There's a couple things we see here in this story that I want to point out for you that I think happens, that I think Jesus knew happens when you listen to people and you let them be heard. And you see those in your notes as well. And let me put them up here on the screen for you. When we let others be heard, one of the things that happens for them is that they feel noticed and known. And not only that, one of the things that happens for us is that we gain some context for serving and sharing. I'll talk about that more in just a moment. Let me talk first about this idea of feeling noticed and known. We see this here with the story of Jesus and the blind man, right? Again, here's this guy, everybody else is ignoring. Some of the people are even trying to hey, be quiet, leave Jesus alone, quit crying out to him. And yet Jesus chooses to listen to him, to let him be heard. And in doing that, maybe for the very first time, this blind beggar on the side of the road was noticed and felt known. And in some ways, Jesus was communicating something even without communicating anything, right? He was communicating to this man and being noticed and known that he mattered, that he had value, that he had worth. He was validated in some way, that he meant something to Jesus. Jesus gave him his attention, and in doing so was actually giving him his affection as well. He was communicating love and value and worth because this man, in being heard, felt noticed and known. And one of the reasons I think that's so powerful and profound, even in our day and age as well, is that if we're honest enough to admit it and aware enough to recognize it, I think we all long for that. I think one of the reasons why listening can be so powerful in our day and age is that I think for all of us, we all kind of chase in this life, we chase different ways that we feel like we'll find ourselves being noticed and known, right? And there are a lot of examples I could give you of how we see that in our life, but one of the examples that I think stands out in our culture today is just what we see with social media, right? Social media, and for the first time in all of history, has created a brand new dynamic for us, where now, depending on what platforms you're a part of and how many friends or followers you have an endless, always at your access, always available to you opportunity for you to be what? To be heard. And it's an endless opportunity for us to chase after that in different ways, to let other people know what we're thinking about and what we want to talk about. It's a way for us to let people know what exercises we're doing or what diets we're trying to stick to, or lets people know around us the cool, fun things that our kids are doing and the things that are driving us absolutely insane. It's an opportunity to celebrate good things and to air out some of our dirty laundry. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I see some of the things someone will post and I'll think to myself, now, why would somebody actually post that on social media, right? And there may be a lot of reasons why, a lot of answers to that, but I think at the heart of it, one of the primary reasons why many people post the kinds of things that they do is that we all long to be heard, to be noticed, to be known, to be understood, to be valued, to be validated in some way. And I think Jesus knew this. And this is the really incredible thing about us as his people, as his followers, as the church. We actually, when we choose to listen to people, again, we can communicate something without having to communicate anything. We can affirm their value and worth. We can show them love through our listening in a variety of ways. And we actually, when we choose to do that, we actually can offer people the gift of the real, genuine thing, not just the counterfeits that so many people chase after through something like social media and all the other ways that we try to be noticed and try to be known. We actually can give that gift to the world around us. Now, not only does listening offer something to others, not only does it give us an opportunity to give something to them, it's actually an opportunity for us to gain something as well. We're able to help them feel noticed and known, but we're also able to gain context for knowing how to serve them and how to share perhaps God's story with them. One of the things we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks is the idea of serving. As we said earlier, that first S in bless is the idea of serving others. And when we listen to them, it helps us to do that right and to do that well. And letting others be heard, we gain context, we gain understanding, we gain knowledge and awareness of their story and what they're walking through and how we can come alongside of them. It helps us to do that well. It informs our serving so that we do it the right way. And not only that, it gives us context for sharing God's story. Again, we're going to be talking about in a few weeks the idea of how do we share God's story with people? How do we apply God's story to their story? And when we listen well to others, just like we saw with Jesus, what did he ask? He said, what do you want me to do for you? It informs how we serve and it informs how we share with them. It lets them feel noticed and known, but it also gives us context and awareness and understanding for how to serve and how to share God's story with them. I think Jesus understood this. I think this is why he valued stopping and listening, why we see him do it over and over again. And I think he would look at all of us today, having read his story and an example of how he did this. And I think Jesus would look us in the eye and say, hey, come follow me. Become like me. Do what I did. Look to not only begin with prayer, but then look for opportunities to bless people through your listening. Another story I want to share with you as an example, that was one of him listening so others could be heard. I want to share with you now a story of Jesus eating with someone so that they could belong. It's found in Matthew chapter 19, written by a guy named Matthew, all right, about a guy named Matthew, as you'll see here in just a moment. So this is his story of how Jesus interacted with him and invited him to follow him. And so I want to read this for you again in Matthew chapter 9. You can read along there or listen along as I read this for you, starting in verse 9 there. It says this: as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew who was sitting at the tax collector's booth. And this is an important detail I don't want you to miss there, the idea of him sitting at the tax collector's booth. What we know about Matthew is that in Jesus' day, he was what they referred to, what they knew as a tax collector. And in maybe much like our day and age as well, the tax collectors weren't the most popular people on the block. They weren't the people that everybody loved and enjoyed and wanted to be around. And there were a couple reasons for that in Jesus' culture, in the Jewish culture in particular, because for a Jewish person like Matthew to be a tax collector, it meant one thing. First of all, it meant that he was a traitor. Essentially what he had done is he had sold himself out to the Roman Empire, and he said to the Roman Empire that ruled the world at the time, I'll collect your taxes for you from my people. And so the Jewish people despised them for it. It was like they sided with the enemy. And so they hated the tax collectors because they were considered to be traitors. But not only were they considered to be traitors, they couldn't stand the tax collectors because they were also considered to be cheaters. One of the ways that it worked is Rome would say, hey, here's how much you need to collect for taxes. You send us that. As long as we get that money from you, you can keep whatever else you're able to get. And so they didn't have news channels and the internet and all kinds of things. People didn't really know how much taxes they were supposed to pay. So they just had to take the tax collector's word for it, and the tax collector could charge you whatever they wanted. And as long as they paid Rome their money, they could keep whatever was above and beyond that. And so they were known not only as traitors, but also as cheaters. Nobody liked the tax collectors. Nobody wanted anything to do with them. And yet Jesus comes along. He does the unthinkable. He comes to Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth, and unlike every other good religious person in his day that would have kept their distance and despised them, maybe grimaced at them in some way, Jesus comes up to him and he says, Matthew, nobody else has done this for you. Won't you come and follow me? So Matthew did what you do when nobody else is inviting you to do that, and now Jesus comes and says, come follow me. Matthew got up. And he followed him. And I want you to notice what seems to have happened next. It says, while Jesus was having what? Dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and what? Ate together with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples. The Pharisees were a particular group of the Jewish people of the day. They were a very rigid and legalistic group. And this drove them crazy. I mean, why would a good Jewish leader like Jesus, why would he do this? And so they came and they asked the question of his disciples, why does your teacher what? Eat together with tax collectors and sinners. You know the good religious people avoid all of them. Why does he eat with them? On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. He says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous or those who think that they're righteous. I've come for sinners like them. That's why I eat together with them. Again, I love this story of Jesus. I love what it reflects about him. And one of the things that I hope we don't miss there, one of the things that I love Jesus most for in this story is the way that he was known for eating with people. I love the way that when he invited Matthew to follow him and Matthew said yes, it seems like the first thing he did wasn't send Matthew to a church service or a Bible study or give him a book to read or a program to work through. What did Jesus do with him? He ate a meal with him and with others who were like him. And again, this is just one example of Jesus doing something he did over and over and over again. I think Jesus knew that eating wasn't just about feeding our bodies. There was something about gathering around a table with other people. There was something about spending unrushed, unhurried time together that was not just for our bodies. There was something about that was somehow like good for our spirits, good for our souls in some way. And so Jesus regularly practiced eating together, especially with those who felt far from God. And one of the reasons why I think he did this is that I think for Jesus, just like we said with listening, how it lets others be heard, we say with eating, it lets others belong. And something powerful and profound happens when we gather people around the table and we let them belong. When we do that with other people, what happens for them is this: they begin to feel welcomed and wanted. And as we'll talk about here in just a moment, we gain context with listening for serving and sharing. With eating and letting people belong, we gain credibility for serving and sharing. Let me talk for a moment about this idea of feeling welcomed and wanted. Again, we see this with Jesus in the story of Matthew and the tax collectors and the sinners, right? These were the people that nobody wanted. These were the people that nobody welcomed. And yet Jesus was different. He invited them around the table. He ate together with them, and in eating with them, he let them belong. And when they belonged, they felt welcomed and wanted. Now, I think this too, just like we said with listening, is such a powerful and profound thing, even in our day and age as well, because just as we see with Matthew and the tax collectors and the sinners that Jesus was always eating together with, I think it's true in our day as well. I think we all long and are looking for that and are trying to find that and experience that in our lives as well. I think you and me and everyone else around us, we all long to feel welcomed and wanted as well. And we chase that down in a lot of different ways, sometimes very dysfunctional and unhealthy ways, but we all long for that. We all long to be loved and not alone. We all, I think, want to be wanted. We want to be enjoyed. We want to know that other people actually want to be with us and spend time with us, and they're not just doing it out of obligation or duty, but they actually, they choose us. They choose to spend time with us. I think deep down, all of us have a longing, a heart for feeling welcomed and wanted. Again, I could illustrate that in a lot of different ways for you, but one of the illustrations I'll give you today, I feel like is a very incredible and an appropriate one. Even though we're a few months away from football season, yesterday kind of felt like football season, right? And so I don't think there's ever a bad time to give you an example of the Chicago Bears. So let me do that with you for a minute. As some of you may be aware, probably many of you don't actually care, but I'll tell you anyways, that last year before the season, the Bears hired a brand new coach, and it's something you do when you're not very good and you have to cycle through coaches quite a bit. But we hired a coach named Matt Nagy. Here he is right in the middle, and he went on to win Coach of the Year in the NFL. He won a lot more games than we had won in the last several years combined, and actually took our team to the playoffs and did all kinds of fun and cool things. And yet he wasn't a success because of just the X's and O's of football, or the way that he managed the game, or the way that he got our team into the playoffs, or even the way that he knocked the Packers out of playoff contention at the end of the season when they were a mess, which was absolutely amazing as a side note. But it wasn't for all of that, or wasn't just because all of that he did such an excellent job as a coach. It wasn't just the way that he managed the game, but actually the way that he managed the team, the guys that were a part of the team. One of the themes that he instilled from the very beginning with their team is that they were going to be a family. And I know it was a theme for them because if you listen to the players last year in almost every interview throughout the season, it was like these guys were always mentioning, we're a family, we're a family, we're a family. If we win, we're a family. If we lose, we're a family. If someone makes a mistake, we're a family. We're going to support each other. We're going to encourage each other. We're going to belong together. Even at the end of the season when they went to the playoffs and they lost tragically to the Philadelphia Eagles with the infamous double doink kick. Be careful now, come on. Which, if I'm being honest, still hurts a little bit deep down in my gut. Even then, their players came out supporting their kicker, standing by his side because they were a what? A family. This is how I know it's God's team. I mean, they're basically a church. They're almost a church. It's just a little, almost there. Now, what was interesting in the offseason is that some of those guys who had great seasons, their contracts expired, and they had the opportunity to test the market and go other places and probably get paid more than they were getting paid or were going to be paid there. And yet many, if not most of them, decided to stay. Some of them even restructured their contracts. They asked to get paid less money than they were promised already to get paid over a series of years so that they knew they could stick around and be a part of that. And why did they do that? It wasn't for the money. I think it was because they felt like they belonged, because it was a family, because they felt welcomed and wanted. And I share that with you partly because I know not many of you are Bears fans, so I got to try to work that in as many times as I can. But more importantly, that I think it's a great illustration that these young men who many times are portrayed as only chasing after the money, I think some of them realize there was something actually more important than that illustrates, I think, a need we all chase after at times. We want and long to belong, to be wanted and welcomed. And this is why eating together can be so powerful and profound, not just for our bodies, but there's something about it that's good for our hearts. When we gather people around the table, we're communicating to them that they matter to us, that we want to be with them, that we want them a part of our lives. We want to spend time with them. They're welcomed and wanted. And not only that, not only what we give to them, as I said with listening, I think there's also something we gain from that. We said with listening, we gain context for serving and sharing. I think when we eat around the table with people, we gain credibility for serving and sharing. We gain relationship. We gain rapport. When we seek to serve them and come alongside them, when we seek to share God's story with them, we're not doing it from the standpoint of a stranger that's trying to barge into their life. We're doing it as a friend, of somebody who's welcomed them and let them know that they're wanted and is a part of their life with them. It opens the doors for us to do those things well, not only in an informed way, but in an intimate way with them. And this is why I think Jesus was always doing what we see him doing and eating together with others so that they could belong, knowing that when they belonged, they felt welcomed and wanted, and he gained credibility. Just as we see with Matthew and the tax collectors, I think they probably listened to Jesus and responded to Jesus in a whole new way after Jesus invested time to eat together with them. And I think Jesus would look at all of us, and I think he'd say to us, those who consider ourselves to be his people, and he'd say, hey, you want to be a part of what I'm doing in the world? You want to be a part of this mission to rescue and restore? Then come and become like me and do what I did. Come follow me. Begin with prayer and join me in the work that I'm doing in the world, and then lean in a little farther and listen to people and let them be heard, and then lean in a little farther still and eat together with people and let them belong. Sometimes the most impactful and meaningful and missional things that we can do in this life are just to listen and to eat so that others can be heard and others can belong. Now, how do we do this? Before we go, I want to share with you just a few quick practical thoughts on how we can do this well, how we can follow Jesus' example with this. And the first thing I want to point out for you with that is this. I think if we want to do this well, the place that we have to begin, or one of the places for us to begin, is this. We need to commit ourselves to listen more and listen better. And that's so easy for us to say, but not so easy for us at times to do, right? We live, as it relates to listening more, we live in a culture that is more of a talk more kind of culture. Again, we said we all want to be heard, and so we're constantly trying to say the things that we want to say and to talk more and perhaps listen less. And I think Jesus would have us kind of flip that script for a moment. In fact, Jesus' own brother, a guy by the name of James, who wrote one of the books that we have in our Bibles, he actually challenged us with this in James chapter 1. We have it up here on the screen where he says this: everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Simple words, but can you imagine what could happen? The ways that we could bless others around us, the way that we could love others around us if we just practiced that. Sometimes we talk about this with our kids. We talk about the importance of listening more and talking less. And I try to illustrate for them, even just with human anatomy and how God has designed our bodies. I point out to them, hey guys, listen, God's given us 2 ears and just 1 mouth, right? Almost as if to suggest we should listen twice as much as we talk. And then we take it a step further for them and we say, and not only that, God has also not only given us 2 ears, he's also given us 2 eyes. We point out to them that when we listen to people, we should listen with both our ears and our eyes, because the thing we found with them is that if they're not looking, they're probably not what? Listening, right? And so now we have 4 parts that God's given to us to listen to just 1 part, our mouth, for talking. What if we began there and just committed ourselves to listen more and to talk less? Not only do we need to listen more, though, I think we also need to listen better. One of the challenges for many of us is that even when we are listening, we're not necessarily practicing good listening, right? I think to listen better, we need to make sure we listen without an agenda and not trying to get something from them, but to give something to them, to affirm their value and worth, to listen to others just to let them be heard, not to try to manipulate them, not to try to get something from them, not to steer the conversation where we want it to go or to wrap up the conversation when we want it to end, but just to listen to them, to be a blessing to them. I think we need to listen without an agenda. We also need to listen with full attention. This is a huge challenge in our culture. We live in a super distracted culture where there are a million things calling for our attention. And many times, again, when we are listening, we're really only half listening, right? One of the traps that many of us fall into is that even when we're listening to people, we're not actually listening to what they're saying. We're only thinking about what we want to say, right? I heard someone say this once. It's a great quote or a great line where they said, the opposite of listening isn't talking, it's waiting to talk. Which is such an easy trap for us to fall into. But I think as followers of Jesus, we ought to do better than that. I think we ought to be the best listeners. We ought to be the most genuinely curious people about others around us, knowing that they're made in God's image, that they're loved by God, and we want to show our love for them in the ways that we listen. I think we ought to ask the best questions as followers of Jesus. We've got to listen more, listen better. Second thing that I want to challenge you with that I think will help us to do this well is not only listening more and listening better, but I think we also have to prioritize people over perfection. And here's what I mean by that. I think in our culture, particularly in our culture, one of the biggest hurdles for many of us in practicing the things that we're talking about today and listening, but especially the idea of eating together with others, is that for many of us, if we can't do it perfectly, well, then we just won't do it at all. And so if the house isn't clean enough, or the food isn't fancy enough, or it's not decorated fancy enough, or the kids aren't behaved enough, or whatever other excuse we might come up with that makes it something that's not perfect. If it's not perfect, we don't do it at all. And yet I think Jesus would challenge us to do it a different way, to do it a better way. That we'd realize that the point isn't the point is to join in the work of what God's trying to do in their life and doing with them, not the validation of our worth that we're trying to get from them. And so I want to challenge you. Again, prioritize the point. It's the people. Prioritize the people over the perfection. Invite people to eat with you, even if the house isn't neat and tidy, even if it doesn't look like Joanna Gaines designed it, even if it's not big enough. People talk all the time, if I just had a bigger house, I'd invite people in. Here's what I've learned about myself and many others. Many times we say that, then we move in the bigger house and it's still not good enough. And we still come up with excuses. Here's what I've found in my life. The people that have done this well for me, when they've invited me to the table and they've helped me feel like I belong, they've helped me feel wanted and welcome by eating together with me, I didn't really care what their house looked like. I didn't really care what we had to eat. I mostly cared that they cared about me. We tell our kids all the time that people often won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel. I think it's the same thing with eating. They may not remember what food you made for them unless it's like the delicious smoked meat that Judge Johnson makes for us. I remember that kind of food, but they may not remember what you fed them or what your house looked like, but they'll remember how you make them feel. If you invite them to the table and let them belong, I'd guarantee you they'd remember that. We need to prioritize people and not perfection. And the last thing I want to challenge you with this is this, that if we're going to do this well, if we're going to listen to others, if we're going to eat together with others the way that we saw Jesus do, we're going to have to make room for others in our schedules and spaces. So simple of an idea. but so important to point out. Here's what I found about myself, and I think is true about you. We live in a busy world. We're all busy people. We have full plates that always seem to be overflowing. And so because of that, we're never gonna just drift into these things that we're talking about today, or we're never gonna just do them because we're supposed to. We're gonna have to make conscious decisions to make room, to prioritize it, to make room for others in our schedules and our spaces. And one of the convicting thoughts I have with this, I think about Jesus, and I think one of the things I wanna challenge you with today is this: there was no one in history who is more important than Jesus. There was no one in history with a bigger job to do or more responsibilities on his plate or more at stake or more that hung in the balance or more weight on his shoulders than him. And yet even Jesus, and perhaps especially Jesus, made it a priority to do this. And I think we as his followers need to make sure we do as well. Thinking about this just the other night as we were getting ready to teach on this weekend. We came home from a long day. We had helped my brother-in-law and sister-in-law move some stuff into their new house, and the kids were with us. Everybody was up later than they should be, and we got home a little bit late. And I don't know about you, but if you're a dad or just a parent in the room, maybe you have this happen to you as well. But when I start to get close to bedtime, but I feel like we're kind of far from bedtime, I start to feel this pressure and angst. Like, wait a minute, I love my kids, but I'm like done dadding for the day, right? I'm like ready to clock out, kick my feet up, enjoy a little R&R that I feel like I've earned after a long day. And so you start to feel that pressure, and I know I've got some chores I still need to do before I can call tonight, and I'm hoping to kind of settle in and sit down with Natalie and enjoy some time with her. And as we came home, we were already running way behind on that. I'm starting to feel some of that angst, and I ended up in a conversation with one of my neighbors. And she's an older lady. Her husband's out of town for a few weeks. She had a lot on her heart, and she just started talking and sharing a bunch of stuff. And I'll just admit to you, I'm not proud to admit it, but the fleshly part of me, when I got home, the non-Jesus-y part of me, when she started talking to me, my first thought was, oh, not now. Again, I got a lot of things I'm still got to check off before the end of the night. I want to get the kids to bed, but so they're not in a bad mood the next day. I want to make sure that I get my chores done. I want to try to snuggle in next to Natalie on the couch before it gets too late and she gets too tired, because if I play my cards right, maybe it'll be more than snuggling with Natalie. And I'm thinking to myself, don't ruin this for me, Marilyn. Come on. And all the dudes in the room said an amen to that, right? You know what I'm talking about. And then I remembered what we're talking about this weekend. I remembered this idea of what we see in Jesus. And I remembered, wait, Tyler, this is what it's all about, being a follower of him. This is what it looks like for us to bless people in our world the ways that Jesus did, through our listening, through our eating together with them. We have to make room in our schedules and spaces for that. And I felt like Jesus really challenged me in that moment. I just want to challenge you again with this as well, this idea that, Tyler, I came and I died for you. Will you die to yourself for me? Will you die to yourself so that others will know that I came to die for them as well? I'm getting better at it. I'm not perfect at it. But I think this is the invitation Jesus gives all of us to come and follow him. And here's my prayer and challenge for all of us then as we leave here today. As we continue to make our way through this series, we think about these simple practices, beginning with prayer, listening, eating together, and the other ones that we'll talk about as well. As we think about particularly listening and eating together, one of the things I've wrestled with, that I hope you'll wrestle with as well, as we think of those stories of Jesus and what we saw there, what if the thing in the lives of people around us, the people that feel far from God, the people that need to know about Jesus, that need to put their trust in Jesus, that need to join and be a part of God's family, what if the thing that would move people around us there in his direction, what if the thing that would do that for them is the thing that we saw with Jesus and the blind man, just stopping, one of us stopping long enough to notice somebody that everybody else overlooks or ignores or doesn't pay attention to or doesn't have time for in the chaos and the congestion of the things that we're busy doing and the places we're trying to go and the things that we're trying to accomplish. What if the thing that would move them to him was us just doing what he did and stopping and listening so that they can be heard? Or what if the thing that would move someone in his direction toward Jesus, to experience what he wants to do in their life, what if the thing that would do that for them was, just as we saw with Matthew, just one of us welcoming them in and inviting them to join us at the table and to eat together with us and to feel welcomed and wanted by us? What if gathering them into God's embrace started with us just gathering them into our embrace and welcoming them in with us? I think the example of Jesus today reminds us that many times, just like we saw with him, it's one of the ways that God can work. So my hope and prayer for us today is that our prayer to God would be this: God, we're gonna make room in our lives for you to do, just as we sang earlier, whatever you wanna do. We're gonna open up our lives to others so maybe they'll open up their lives to you, God. And so we make room for that. As a prayer of response, as a prayer of commitment to God, we're gonna sing that song that we sang earlier together. Earlier saying we're gonna make room for you to work in us, but now we're gonna pray it as a prayer of God, we're gonna make room for you to work through us in the lives of others around us, amen? So why don't you stand with me and let's sing this out as a prayer of response and commitment to our God.
Lift your voice.
Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion.